Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another edition of SCI Nano Chat. Super excited to have Vivek join with us today. I had the pleasure of meeting Vivek actually a while ago, right? A talk that I gave at Brandeis, and again this past week at an event. And I just knew I needed to bring him on and chat more about what he's doing. And he's doing so much. And so I am super excited to learn more and engage with you and have a conversation. And these nano chats are super informal. We have, there are slides that Vivek has, but really, we can engage and have a normal conversation. So Vivek, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's an honor, and it's nice to meet Jim and Ethel. Maybe we can talk at a later point too. That'd be awesome. So just as a quick overview, I just slapped some of these slides together. I'll do a quick introduction into myself, and then I'll sort of talk about very quickly the relationship between science and the public. And these are just my opinions. And then sort of like how I'm trying to maybe mend a rift that may be starting to be created between science and the public. And sort of the way that I do outreach is at the most standard level. I do exposing the public to science through different types of talks and science art. But then the second thing that I do that maybe is a little bit less standard is that I actually go and into like the high schools, and there like I try to have each student bloom and essentially feel like they're connected and have the right and ability to write onto the larger bed of knowledge that is what science represents. And then the third is like a little bit more like out there and crazy. And it's really sort of focused on creating events, multidisciplinary events that bring different people together, especially bring people from the public that are not necessarily within the house of science, and try to bridge reality with surreality and allow science and the science juices to flow into the collective consciousness, identity, and dreams of society. So, before I go on, I'll just do a quick introduction. And the introduction I'll do, this is like an introduction that I do for my high school students. So I'm not going to go through all the slides in great detail, but I'll just quickly slide through them so you get like a general view of who I am. So my name is Vivek Pandey. Currently, I'm a postdoc at Brandeis, and my funding agency, I should have put that here, is the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and I study spatial disorientation. I was born and raised in the US. These are my report cards from elementary school, so I did very poorly. These are all Fs. I did very poorly on the standardized tests, and also I was physically very weak. I think it's important to show this to high school students just so that they know that they can generate ideas regardless of where they think academically they are. And then I went to Lexington High School. I graduated from there. I went to BU. I studied physics and minored in computer science and math. I wanted to see the architecture of this universe. A whole bunch of things happened. My family started to fall apart. I didn't get good grades. And I really went into these cycles of self-hatred. And around that time, I went to Officer Candidate School for the Marine Corps. I somehow graduated that. And I thought about that, should I go into the Marine Corps? And I decided not to. And instead, I became a high school teacher. And I taught at Waltham High School for 6 years. And I mostly taught physics, but I also did environmental science. I did 1 year of chemistry. I got some opportunities to work at Rockefeller University to do research as a high school teacher. And I also got Bell's palsy at that time, where half my face got paralyzed. And then, and I didn't talk about this, but I go through hair cycles. So every 6 years or so, I shave off all of my hair and I set new goals. And so I had been teaching for about 6 years, and time had come for me to, go on to the next stage of my life. So I shaved off all my hair and I went to India, which is where my family's from. And I, worked in NGO. I made documentaries and wrote grants on like climate change and subsistence farming. I went to the United Nations Climate Change Conference to present a little bit of my work. I also worked with like entrepreneurship and tribal women and the condition of children in a city. Okay, and then after that, I came to Brandeis and did my PhD there in neuroscience, and now I'm a postdoc. Okay, so that is the introduction into me. And the first part is sort of like, what is the relationship between science and the public? And again, this is all my opinion. I haven't had time to like really cite all of this stuff. But in my idea or my viewpoint, science is becoming very siloed. It's becoming very esoteric, and it's becoming very inaccessible for the public. And I feel the public feels very disconnected with science. And I think, years ago there was a huge trust between science and the public, but I think there's distrust that's beginning to form, like fissures within the landscape of the public and science. And climate change is obviously one example of it, but I think it's getting deeper in many other subjects too. So in my opinion, we need to do more of the standard types of outreach that everyone talks about, which is just go and talk about your science, promote it, show how exciting it is, make it accessible in terms of just like, here's what we're doing, here's what we're using public funding to do. But then I think we really, really need to give the public the ability to contribute to science. And this is like citizen science, and I'll talk about my brand of that. And then the final thing again is I think we really, really need, there's a time when science, like people dreamed about science, right? We were all dreamers, and philosophy and science were mixed together. And maybe sort of like the destiny of humanity was aligned with science, that we're going to use science to build and do this with destiny. But now I feel like a lot of that viewpoint has been sort of diffused, and it doesn't feel like science for the average person is a way that they can sort of express their journey, their mythology, their narratives, who they are, and what do they want to become. And I think having that conversation is very critical, and I think we actively need to do that as a community. Okay, so the first type of outreach, as I mentioned, I do is science talks. And I also do science art because I think art is a really good communicator of the work that a person does. And again, the benefit of just doing this standard type of outreach is that it can excite the public, although there's still obviously a barrier. Like they look at the science, they're like, wow, that's so cool, but I can't reach it, I can't touch it. There's too much of a wall around it for me to actually use it for my life. And in my opinion, again, these are not any, it's not great wisdom, but like, I think in my opinion, sharing a life journey is very, very important. My background is teaching high school, and like, again, these are not necessarily my ideas, but like when you communicate, there are two domains of communication. One are these like rational, conscious thoughts that you have, but then there's always an emotional undercurrent. So if you go to a climate denier and you just throw facts at them, it never works, because you first have to emotionally resonate with them, create that bond of trust, and only then are they going to be receptive to receiving all of this knowledge. And I think sometimes in our training in science communication, we forget how to emotionally connect with people. And I think one way is just giving a life journey and sort of talking about a little bit of like in an honest and genuine way, what have been your struggles, who are you, what do you find beautiful in life, what are your dreams, things like that. So I think this should be a core part of any sort of communication we do. And this does sort of fit into the current narrative in outreach, where like we're trying to show the community or the public that scientists don't particularly look like one type of person, but rather are a variety of people, and that they're not just like these antisocial nerds, but actually are socially sometimes very capable, because you need to in order to create these multidisciplinary collaborations. Okay, the other really key thing is that again, as scientists, we don't really get training on, and sometimes it's actually looked down upon, is that being entertaining is like absolutely critical, in my opinion, to talk to the public. Because if you're not entertaining, people aren't going to listen to you. And as a high school teacher, like those, my kids would lose attention within 5 minutes. And so almost every 5 to 10 minutes, I'd have to switch it. And if you look at things like Radiolab, who are very effective at teaching, it's a podcast, science, their style is that even if they're talking about the same material, every like 5 minutes, they'll switch the speaker. And it's, it's not always the best thing to do, but it's interesting that they do that. And it may be one of the reasons for their success, that you just need to be switching so that the excitement is there. And then of course, being short and clearly articulated, and then no jargon. And again, another thing I see with scientists is sometimes they define things in the beginning and then they think, okay, good, I've defined it. Now I can use these jargony terms for the rest of my presentation. But people's working memory, especially if they haven't encountered some of these terminologies, is short. And so they'll forget it, and midway through, they don't know what you're talking about. So those are just some ideas. And again, just to like some examples, and I won't really go through all of them, but this was a talk I had done in the New York Academy of Sciences. And again, just to like highlight, like I talked about my life journey before I sort of went into my research. The other sort of stuff I've done in terms of like promoting the science is like this is like a promotional Brandeis video, which is just 2 minutes long, but it's sort of like, done with music and everything. And it's like, it's kind of theatrical. And then this is with Tom Scott. And so this got like 250,000 views, which was cool. So I invited this, he's a YouTuber, into my lab. And even doing that was like a little bit difficult because for some reason people are wary to bring in people from outside. But when he came in, like the whole idea was like, how do you take his viewpoint and have it sort of like expressed in here? And so again, like he came in, and I think it was a pretty good time. Okay, so those are some examples. Then the next type and then the next type is also artwork. And so I think art is like a very important medium. And so, and I do like a variety of it. So for example, the first type I do is just basic science art gallery. And so this was during the Festival of Arts at Brandeis. And this display that I curated was in the music department. And so this allowed scientists and musicians to sort of talk to one another, and for the musicians to sort of be exposed to, this is like all data collected within Brandeis. And then this one is sort of like my piece over here that represents human balancing in different conditions. And I 3D printed, with the help of my collaborators, these towers that represent data of actual learning how to balance in a disorienting condition. I also do like events at Brandeis where I bring people. So this was together. This is in collaboration with the Office of the Arts. And we basically just had a rock art event where scientists would come and they would have to represent their artwork, or I guess their science, in one image. And it had to be simple enough where they could describe it in a few sentences. And so this was a way to sort of engage with the scientists to communicate their ideas clearly in a creative way, but also sort of like bring in like undergrads and other people that had just like plankton flowing through this space that decided to stop and see what was going on. The other sort of stuff I've done is I have a multidisciplinary group, and so I didn't create these things. I organized it so that I had a physics professor come and an art professor come, and the physics professor's undergrad essentially created a 3D replica of Tuvalu, which is an island nation that's being affected by climate change, and he was studying sort of how climate change will affect it, but then it was also an art display that was shown at the Festival of Arts, and so he created this whole thing. And I also do like a lot of clothing art. So I wear clothing that sometimes looks kind of crazy, but then people inevitably ask, well, what do these patches mean? And so then I talk about the symbolism behind it and sort of, how some ideas of science somehow percolate into the artwork that I create. And I guess the final one in science art, this was shown at the Cambridge Science Festival. I had I called them my kids. I had two pet rats that were very beautiful. They were sacrificial rats that were sort of saved from Brandeis. They're wild type, so it wasn't anything crazy. And they grew all these mammary tumors, like just huge amounts of mammary tumors. And I kept bringing them to the vet, and they would extract and take the tumors out. And so I saved the tumors. And eventually one of my friends sliced it and dyed it with this fluorescent dye. And so this is what went into the Cambridge Science Festival, just to sort of talk about the idea of like animals, sacrificial animals, their purpose in life, and sort of what are tumors. And we even 3D scanned the tumor, and I even did a whole event afterwards where I coordinated my rats and turned them into queens. They were princesses before. Okay, cool. So that's like the sort of standard type of outreach, maybe. And then the second type of outreach that I do is really sort of creating opportunities, because opportunities is where a person can take their flow of creativity and really begin to develop self-confidence that they can do something of great beauty. And science can be a great sort of enabler and a fertilizer for a variety of different things that can go beyond just science itself. So I usually work with the high school population because I was a high school teacher, but I think all of these things can be generalized to the general public. So within outreach, I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'll talk about this summer research program, and then this is where actually Daniel and I met. I was talking about the Prospect Hill project, and I'll also talk about, I think, my pride and joy, a research program that I'm running right now that's embedded within the high school. And then this is very new, so I'll just briefly touch on that. So the summer research so the summer research program, basically when I was a first year grad student at Brandeis, after I had left Waltham High School, I started, it's completely volunteer based. I've never really had funding. Um, and basically what I do in the first year of grad school and then for the next 7 years was I took about 4 to 8 students per summer from Waltham High School, and I brought them to Brandeis and I embedded them in the labs. And there they did like inquiry-based STEM research projects. Uh, and they were sort of paired with like a grad student or a postdoc mentor. It was pretty cool because these kids were all like at the verge of blooming. And by having this opportunity, they really, it's pretty remarkable to see. They really grew quite a bit. There was a problem with this program, which was that it was only 4 to 8 students per summer. And again, these were students that were all at the verge of blooming. And the whole goal was to be able to bring this to almost any student that wanted to be able to do it. Okay, so also, yeah, I mean, I never rejected a student. I made many barriers, like they had to write a lot of like essays and things like that. So at the end of the day, only the very driven students got through. But I never rejected a student, which I'm really proud of. And just naturally, 70% were underrepresented in STEM across the 7 years. Um, and then I have like a website if you want to see like all the different steps I had to do to sort of how do you run a program for completely free, and how do you sort of get permission from the high school and the university and stuff like that. Um, Second project, and this is the one, again, this was just one summer, whereas the previous one I was talking about was a full 7 years. But it's kind of interesting. So Noah, at the time, was an undergrad, and I met him when I was, running an experiment, and I asked him, "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" And I didn't know who he was, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not doing anything." And so we went to a Chinese restaurant and started talking, and he talked about this grant that's available for undergrads, and I helped him, develop his idea, and he wrote it, and it consisted of two parts. One was developing sustainable community gardens, and then my part, which was sort of, again, the same experimental idea of how do you take students and allow them to bloom, was to basically create a research-based course that was focused on the ideas of gardening, but also sort of focused really on idea generation and free creative exploration. So we, developed this project in a low-income housing development in Waltham, create a bunch of partners to be able to do that, did soil testing. Noah did most of the gardening stuff and created vegetable gardens and berry patches, and then these little bins that will, given to individual families. And the educational component, which is what I focused on. Basically, the other thing I was trying to do was when you're a teacher, a high school teacher, a lot of things are focused on state strands. These are basically like a list of things that Massachusetts says that teachers need to teach. And so it's always good to show that whatever initiative you're doing hits some of those things. And so, I used a bunch of state strands to sort of weave it into the discussions that we had with the students and really give them a genuine feeling that they had the right to create, innovate, and add onto the larger bed of human knowledge. There were like obstacles in the sense that the class size would change. I had a core group of students, but it ranged from like a third grader, which was really cool. But then it's like, man, how do I do like real research or inquiry-based research with a third grader all the way up to like a recent high school grad? And my budget was very small too. So I decided to work on vermicomposting, which is like wicked fun. And vermicomposting is just you take the worms, they eat a bunch of like house waste, vegetable waste, I should say, and then they create this really, really fertile, rich poop. And the underlying idea was that first you show them what the big picture is. Like, why does this matter in the larger scale stuff? So we learned about the science of vermicomposting. They made bins, they observed the worms. It was very conversational and discussion based. Then the second thing was we did prior literature. And again, this is all stuff that I'm doing in my high school class right now. This is all stuff that I do in my summer program. And so we actually sat down together with a laptop. We had Google Scholar out, and we looked at, well, what are people researching on vermicomposting? And so the kids, as I went through Google Scholar, picked the papers that they wanted to sort of look at. And in this iteration, I actually read the papers and digested it and then presented to them what the papers were saying. But in the high school course I'm teaching now, the actual students themselves do the literature reading, and then they read the literature and try to interpret and understand what it's saying. And then the stage 3 was that these students had to then, based on the literature that they read, propose ideas that have never been done before. And what I was really amazed was that even the third grader was capable of doing that. And her idea was, how much poop does a worm make when they only eat zucchini? And it's a cool idea. Like it's not in the literature. We don't know. Um, maybe no one really cares. I don't know. But like, it's a cool idea that a person can say, a third grader can say, look, I'm proposing an idea that, as far as I know, no one has explicitly looked at, and I've done a little bit of literature search. It's cool. It's cool that a third grader can sort of do that. A lot of the kids also had really interesting ideas on, like, if you take the worms and if you stack them up, are they as efficient as if they're sort of like, all parallel to each other? So we went and we learned how to do 3D printing, and they learned 3D design. That's what they're doing here. And this was with the help of H. And then I brought them to Brandeis, and they 3D printed, and they learned to fly a drone while they're there. Um, and so this project was only 6 weeks long, so we couldn't finish it all, but they wanted to create a board game and stuff, and we talked about that for a little bit. It was wicked cool. Okay, and then this was just for that presentation I had done, but I sort of talked about the idea that we need to create micro grants, which would really enable high school students. We need to create courses that focus on this and not the state strands, that run parallel to the standard courses across elementary, middle, and high school. And the idea that we need to create these sort of committees that comprise of many people from the community to do fundraising, grant writing. And I really believe, like, local and national level policy change that incentivize NGOs and businesses to really contribute in an active way with the high school, or collaborate in a much greater way than it is right now. Okay, and then sort of like the last, I think, form of this type of outreach, which I'm the most proud of, is this really epic course. And so this course had to pass through school committee, which is hard to do in a way. I volunteer my time, so everything's free, but still, like, it took a lot of effort for the community, or it seemed like to me, effort for this to be accepted. But in a way, it makes sense because this is a 4-credit course. So, like, it means 4 times a week for an hour. The high school students receive Waltham High School credit for it. So it's like a legit course now that is in the high school. And I should say, like, the other problem with the summer program was that even though it's free, there are a lot of students whose families actually depend on those students to work during the summertime to add that extra income. So those kids, even though they could have done the summer program, didn't, because they just had to work. By embedding it during the school day, any student, even those that are expected to provide income for their families, can sort of participate. So that was like the rationale behind doing it. And we had tried after school courses, but they were just very hard because, Waltham is a very sports oriented school. So it was very difficult to have like a core group of students that would be there reliably across the year. Okay, and there's a whole year long course. And basically, the overall idea is that the students learn to read and search for by themselves scientific papers, develop rigorous ideas that, as far as we know, have never been done before, actually implement those ideas, and then analyze that data and be able to interpret what their data means. And then, of course, connect to the bigger picture. Like, who cares about what they're doing? They need to be able to answer that question. We have like 3 major research modules: the environment, which we have some citizen science components to as well; depression and psychology; augmenting the human, which is closer to the research that I do; and then after that, they get a capstone project. And at the end, with the Office of Technology and Licensing at Brandeis, they'll get like a science entrepreneurship course on like how to pitch their ideas and things like that. And there are a total of 27 students in the class. Yeah. And so I guess the final part in this portion of it is sort of like, I'm trying to create this center. And the whole idea of the center, Brandeis doesn't have an engineering school, is to marry together the stuff that the lab I belong to does with like the maker and automation lab at Brandeis, and really create a center where students can freely explore in a scientifically rigorous way ideas that deal with the interaction of human and machine. And so, and this is not just science, we're bringing in people from anthropology, from art, from dance, things like that. So this is just like it's a blooming initiative right now. Okay, so the final thing I'll talk about today is sort of like, how do we weave science and philosophy into society's collective consciousness, identity, and dreams? How do we take people, in the public and say, look, where is humanity going? Like, we're going like 1,000,000 miles per hour. We've got great GDP. we can do all this stuff, but like, have we even stopped to think about like, what is all this consumption and what does all this creation even mean? Because I think, in my opinion, as we get closer and closer to this merge of like machine with human, really fundamentally understanding what the human identity and destiny are is very important. Otherwise, we're going to have all sorts of problems. But again, how do you engage society to have this conversation? And how do you bring scientists in into like a safe place where like they can communicate with the public and these philosophical ideas can be explored? So I'm going to give you an example of one way that I've done it. I do like a bunch of multidisciplinary events, and this is probably, um, you know, in my opinion, one of the more interesting ones that I do. So this is, I called it the Augmenting the Human Party, and these were all the people that came to it. Um, and it had three parts to it. The first was the reality portion of it, which was presentations, mostly done by scientists or people that work on augmenting the human. And so they just talked about here's what the current status is. And the second part was digestion. And digestion is the idea that you socialize with people that you never do. So that was one of the rules. You have to talk to someone that you've never spoken to, that's different than you. And then I do a whole bunch of stuff on American identity that I won't talk about right now, but that was also part of that initiative. And within that, they were supposed to do something, a little bit of artwork. And I also had some interesting demos where they actually became an augmented human, which I'll talk about in a second. So that was part two, digestion. And part three, and this is like, I think in my opinion, crucial, is that in order for things to stick in people's memories, it has to be a little bit ridiculous. It has to be a little bit surreal or weird or whatever. So I'm creating a mythological universe. And within that, there are a variety of different ceremonies that I do. And so we did a ceremony, a symbolic ceremony, to sort of express the idea of giving birth to the next era of humanity, reinforcing the idea that we need to sort of balance our humanity and also our technology. And I'll describe that really quickly. Here's like a creature that lives in my mythological universe. And again, it's just representing the same thing. You have pieces of reality, which is what's represented by this language. It's consumed by this creature. It goes through a process of digestion, which is what happened in the party. And then it creates these symbolic ideas. And Zombieland is the name of my mythological universe. Okay, so the first part, the reality part, these were the different presentations. And we had presentations on AR, VR, on drones and prostheses, on brain-computer interfaces, artificial intelligence, brain stimulation, but also on how do you augment the human through genetics or yoga, or through even chemical augmentation with psychedelics and things like that. We also had sort of how do you augment the human through society and community, and also like the interesting idea that perhaps we've been cyborgs all along. So it's an interesting final thought. And here's an example of after the reality portion, after the presentation, they had socializing, digestion time. And here, what we had, an undergrad, he designed this, is basically, you can't see it too well, but you have an ultrasonic detector here that detects distance, and it's converting it into vibrations from a tactile. And so she's blindfolded, and what she's trying to do is sense where people are around her. And then we played a little game where you had to sort of find people and do like a tag type thing. We did like demos with VR, so you could sort of look at that. And we did demos where like, what he's doing is he's got a VR helmet on or whatever, goggles here, and he's flying a drone, and the drone has a camera on it. So it's basically, these people are dancing, and he's looking at it, flying it and experiencing that. And so then the final part that I talked about is a ceremony, and the weird ceremony is the following. Here I am, this represents placenta, sort of like, it's like the sky, it's the wind, stuff like that. And this is my mom, and she's giving birth. I mean, I'm giving birth, and she's delivering the baby. And the baby that she's delivering is this mannequin, and one half of it represents technology, and the other half of it represents humanity. And then she did like a marriage ceremony, and then people had to balance both of these aspects, humanity and technology, on this placenta. Again, symbolizing that we need to have discussions and balance this thing together. And then they married the two together. And during the discussion section, they all brainstorm ideas. They came up, they talked about their ideas, and they stuck it onto this creature over here. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation, and you can feel free to contact. And here's my email, and then here's my website.
Awesome. So Vivek, that was intense.
Yeah, thanks for
Uh,
putting through all
I think it's just something I'm like blown away a little bit about. I'm trying to process all the information that you've shared and all that you do, right? Which is just amazing. I have so many questions, but I want to just want to open up with Jim and Nita. If you guys want to jump in and ask specific questions, I feel like you probably are also, burning to ask him questions. I will hold off and pass it on to you two and see if you have anything to share.
Yeah, well, one of them I quickly had. I mean, I love everything you're doing. It's clearly you're just a multi-dimensional human being with so many talents.
Thank you
So
so
one
much.
there, I just love the intersection of art and education, science, and just your perspective, and also like just creating new traditions and ways of thinking about such issues as human technology, augmentation, integration, and just educating people. I just love your approach.
Thanks so
Um,
much.
I guess one of the questions I had is, how do you? I mean, I guess with all the things you've learned, uh, have you thought about scaling such things to other schools, other universities, other places? Like, how do we take this sort of way of thinking within high school, elementary, and even especially university students and scale it into the world? Is it more? I saw your micro grant system that you provided. I'm coming from more a CEO side and thinking how do we scale this more universally. I love that approach, and if that's the case, like what are some challenges and opportunities there?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how do I scale this. So, the first issue is that the high school course that I'm doing right now, it's kind of unique because it's the university. I mean, so I guess it's technically not the university. It's me just going into Waltham High, but I bring a lot of people from Brandeis over to sort of like help teach the course. And that question, and it's a very deep question, is how do we scale this so that it goes to other school systems and things like that? I mean, if I had a lot of funding, then I could sort of pay these people, and then we could have like a coordinator or an organizer and things like that. But the other idea that I'm trying to work with, because often funding is hard to get, is how do you sustain this at a volunteer basis? And so what I'm trying to do is weave in academic credit in this model so that the people that are volunteering are getting sort of this academic credit to be able to do it. And then the idea is that like this, template of people from the university coming over, pairing with a high school teacher and teaching a course that's embedded in the actual course can be generalized to other university high school pairings. And I also sort of want to generalize it, as I had discussed, so that it's not just the high school level, but it's going from elementary to middle to high school. If you look at the state strands that Massachusetts puts there, there are pipelines that say that, okay, here are concepts that we want to bring from elementary into middle to high school. But it's never feasible in an actual classroom because there's just too much you have to teach in a standard classroom. And you can't have that continuity. So by having a course like this, which is more focused on innovation and creativity, you could definitely do it. So again, just to sort of summarize, the first thing I would try to do is this course I'm taking, I'm going to try to create like the intellectual content and make it freely available. Both how I implemented it and all of like the lesson plans and everything like that. And then the second thing is to be able to generalize it so that universities can sort of apply it across the school systems. Um, yeah.
I love that idea, and I've done a lot here. I wrote a textbook in voice computing to scale voice computing as a course, or as a vision. Other universities this past year, and I think over 400 people bought the book online, and it's kind of growing, and people all across the world are using it. And so one of the thoughts I immediately thought is, with this presentation, I immediately thought, wow, it'd be awesome to like make a quick book on such things. And it seems like you're open sourcing a lot of this work, but that might be a quick way to do it with low cost, eventually through the students themselves. Um, but I just love your thinking. I'd love to talk offline sometime, collaborations, and we do a lot of tri programs and internships with fellows across the world in our
Cool.
lab. So
Yeah, I'd love to collaborate or discuss in any sort of way.
That's great. Nital, did you want to add
Yeah.
anything? Yeah.
Hey Vivek, this is Neetal. Really great presentation and very, very unique model. I think it's really neat to see. And even with what SAI is doing, there's some connection point. I have two, like a question and a thought. The question is, Not even you've been working in such a creative way with students, both on the science side and kind of holistically. Are there any like outcomes that you've seen, or if you've stayed in touch with the students after, like has that opened up something for them, or has there been anything that you've noticed from students who've been through your program and over time?
Yeah, so I wish in retrospect that I had done a better sort of like pre and post survey type stuff. From the summer program, because that's existed for 7 years. I've had kids that have got like full scholarship to Brandeis that were in my program. I've had kids that published as undergrads papers in the actual labs that they were in, which was really epic. And so like there definitely are successes in that sense, but like how vast that success is, I haven't quantified, just because like there's so many things to do, and I get more positive feedback from doing it than quantifying it. But I know quantification is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I think that's for all of us, because even I do experiential kind of programs on social entrepreneurship. But that brings me to my thought of like you, Danielle, like all of us that are in this space, maybe there's a space to collaborate and share our learnings in something that looks like a white paper or something, because I think this argument, in my opinion, this argument of experiential learning or like kind of immersive learning, like the kinds of things that you're doing, and that everyone is doing, like that there is a huge value, especially in my opinion, in this day of automation and as well as screen time, that this actual connection point is really great. But for schools, like I think you're doing all this amazing work. So much of it is pro bono, and that is amazing. And it may not be as sustainable. Like if you really want to grow this, because at some point you will have to make it into the business that you envision. So by starting to share some of these learnings, even if they feel more qualitative at this point, might help to kind of create that that argument that schools can or universities can further, to show that all of these programs actually have an immense value for student learning or for human well-being. But that's something where I feel like many of us, because everyone is doing the work, so quantifying or tabulating the work is kind of secondary to actually doing the work. So maybe there's something like as a collective that some of those learnings can be pulled out.
Yeah, no, it's a really deep point. I totally agree with you.
It's a challenge, right? The measurement of what you're doing, is it working, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I try to do with these nano chats, I'm always saying, let's look at your theory of change, right? The logic model that that people present, right? Mm-hmm. And going from what is the problem statement, I think you elaborated that really, really well. And going to what Nital was saying and thinking about what is the outcome, like what do you hope that either students or the public would take away, and what is that thing that you could measure, right? That you want to do. I'm just curious if you've thought about that. Maybe you haven't actually measured it, but what is it that you hope that people take away from all the things that you're doing, that the art, the events that you're doing? What is it that they're gonna take away?
I mean, so yeah, it's a difficult but very good question. At the high school program level, the course I'm running, there are particular skills that I want the kids to be able to take away, which is be able to search the literature, be able to propose an idea that's rigorous, that any scientist can be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And you've rigorously thought about what the control is, you've rigorously thought about the methods. You also have like a storyline through the literature that supports why should we do the research that you're doing. So those are like very valuable skills that even first year PhD students don't have, which these kids are developing, and that's definitely quantifiable if I try to do it. And they're also like outside those particular skills. I think like I'm not sure if I like the terminology soft skills, but whatever you want to call it, that I'm trying to sort of impart on them, which is what I call this thing the eye of science, which is being able to see a depth of beauty in the world around you that you typically would not be able to see. And I'm actually teaching this mindfulness course at Brandeis too. And one of the things I'm trying to do on that is just be like, science is the bed of knowledge since the beginning of time. And so if you know, for example, all of the things that are happening in your ecosystem, you can go on a mindful walk that's like absolutely mind-blowing and epic because you see patterns and connections that you typically would not see. And so I kind of want that underlying appreciation to be there. So I guess that's a soft skill, the eye of science. And also the final sort of soft skill is like being able to just be able to dream and create and be like, just because I don't get good grades academically doesn't mean that I don't have the right to create. That everyone has the right to create, and they have genuine fun in that. And I think those are like the three major things that I'm trying to do with the high school course, and then those weave into all of like the artwork and stuff like that I try to do.
And
Can I? Good, good.
Yeah,
And I was just gonna say this reminds me a lot at Georgia Tech when Ravi Balmkanda became the dean of or VP of research for the whole university, and he was trying to put a measure for confidence and entrepreneurism on the whole campus, and it was really low for undergrads. Like very few people started companies, very few people did startups, and so he actually created a novel entrepreneurial confidence measure for students to create startups and measured that over time, pre-post funding startups and doing programs. And this is like one thing I think might be really cool is like maybe do like a scientific confidence score, like for students pre-post your interactions, like in this environment.
That's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
So,
and they do exist, these measures. I think you can certainly find them and utilize them in a pre-post manner so that you can see the delta and say, okay, my intervention was able to change, well, whether it's this attitude or this skill set. And I agree with you, soft skills, actually, I don't like that. It should just be skills. These are just skills, right? like the alternative careers, they're just careers. There's no alternative. And so I think that's a really good metrics to use. So I have to ask this, Vivek, how do you find time to do all of this? You do so much, and I'm just amazed as to how you've been able to balance, right? Because you are doing research and you're doing all these programming. How do you balance it, right? And how does it how do you balance it? Actually, I'll just stop there.
It's like I mean, I guess it's tough. I made some choices that some people may not think would be best for my career. So for example, after grad school, you typically do your postdoc in a different lab. But I decided to do it in the same lab when I wrote my fellowship. And what that allowed me to do is hit the ground running. So like I was already super efficient with my research after spending 6 years in the lab. And now with my postdoc, I didn't have to waste time learning stuff or stop wasting time. You want to be able to learn new skills, but I was able to like continue. And so I didn't have to like invest that. So everything was streamlined. And I guess I don't really socialize that much. I mean, whenever I socialize, it's always under the heading of collaboration. So I guess maybe my social life suffers a little bit. But so things like that, I guess. But I am sometimes in like a strained state because I'm just like I feel like am I allocating enough time to different stuff, or is this like dispersing my ability? Overall, though, I think the dispersal has allowed me to do more unique things, and I think it's amplified my efficiency. I don't know though. It's
because I'm seeing like you bring your full self into this, right? You're allowing the full expression of you, right? Through art, through science, through movement, right? So that you do some movement stuff, and I think that's just amazing. And one of the things we're trying to do at SAI is to really be a place where people can absolutely like grow and flourish in those dimensions, right?
Yeah. So for my website, actually, what my website's trying to do, and the website's still like a complete mess, but it's trying to like deposit all of these like islands of like creativity I do, but create like a storyline that connects all of them together.
Right.
And like you said, like the science is a expression of myself, as is my art, as is everything. And so it's easier to motivate me to do stuff because like everything is an expression of self, and it's a very like selfish whatever expression. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. It is connected, right? It is connected in a way. And so what is the future for you? Like, are you going for an academic position, or are you trying to do something just completely new that no one is doing yet?
Yeah, I don't know if my answer is going to be satisfying by me, but the basic idea is I've got funding till next December, December 2020. And in that period of time, I'm just trying to get to like a different state of thinking. So I'm trying to get into like being able to get to the next level of idea generation and give birth to something that I find beautiful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be within science. It could be anywhere. And I'm just trying to arrange all the pieces in my destiny landscape so that I can get that resonance, so that I can sort of give birth and get into that zone of thinking. Not exactly sure what that means in terms of my future. There are things I like about science because like I have a lot of freedom right now and I can do whatever I want, and I can think about ideas and I can explore them. But I don't know. I mean, like, so yeah. I guess long story short, I don't know what I'm doing, and
Okay.
yeah. But
That's,
after my next rebirth ceremony, my rebirth ceremony, you're all invited to come to this. It's July 11th, 2020. And that rebirth is when I shave my hair and set new goals. And this will be like a dance-based rebirth ceremony, where we dance out the journey of humanity. After that, I'll go in the dissemination phase of my life, where I'm going to really focus on content development. So this high school program thing, I'm going to package it as content, and then I'll hit the Instagram and the YouTube, and it'll be, so that's also the next phase of my life. Yeah.
okay. Okay. I just want to know SAI is here to assist in any way. As I told you before, looking forward to collaborating on this new paper that is now possible to do. But I think it's always a challenge, you know. And I'm just curious from your end, what advice would you give people that are struggling to balance the different sides of themselves? You know, they want to do, they're scientists, let's say, or just either the graduate students or postdocs or whatever, faculty, right? Faculty too, who are wanting to do the different, they want to express the different dimensions of who they are, right? And there really is, it's hard to do that, right? In academic sense, you have to publish your papers, you know, and do the normal route. But what advice do you give others who are looking to express the full dimension of themselves?
I'm not sure if I can give advice because I'm not sure if the way that I've done it is correct, or useful. I can basically just say what I do, but yeah, I'm not sure if it's good advice or not. But I think as we sort of talked about, um, based on in some labs you don't have any time. You just have to pump, pump, pump. My lab's really chill, but regardless of what situation you are, the philosophy that I go by, don't know how realistic it is that you can open up a mini universe of beauty anywhere. And so I guess like another way of sort of saying it is like these phase plots that I showed you very quickly that I did for the Festival of Arts, they actually led to real research. You know, I was exploring an artistic way to show my data just because like I wanted to like make this image. And then as I got deeper into the phase plots, I was like, whoa, like actually I can quantify stuff with this, and it became one of my metrics. So I guess like if you have a desire for artwork or a desire for outreach, even within the flow of the lab, you can open up like 10, 15 minutes where you can explore that. But again, I'm saying that, but I'm not confident because like everyone's flow is very different. And the life choices I've made, I have compromised a little bit of how much research I publish. I publish much lower rate than someone else would because I do all of these other things. And I'm not sure if that's good for my career. I don't really, So in any case, I don't have advice to give.
No, no, that's still good. I think just,
Okay.
this is a constant struggle
Yeah.
we all have,
Yeah.
and one of the reasons actually I created SAI was I wanted to create a space where I could fully bring my myself right at this intersection between, and I feel like you are there, like this intersection between science and society. And I love the idea that you're saying you're giving birth to this, mini universes that are kind of alternative, right? Or evolution, if you will, right? Because I think a lot about, in about 100 years' time, as these circles begin to really merge, the science and society, and they're no longer like separate, they're now one on top of each other. What is that like? And I feel like you are embodying that right now. Like you're just
Thank you.
showing us the possibilities, right? Of what new things could come, what new ideas, right? What new questions could be generated, like scientific questions that we could explore at this interface. That I think is we are really at the beginning of trying to explore it, and that's what keeps me going. Meeting people like you, and and working with Nital and Jim, and they're just being kind of instrumental. I'm hoping that you guys can connect offline and talk further. Absolutely. So, any other questions, Jim, Nito, comments?
I mean, just excellent presentation. I just love all your work. I mean, re-emphasize that. Thank you for all you do for people and students. I can see the impact you made just here, and it's just so great.
Thanks so much.
And I think we need more of it. And I think the energy you put into what you do is it's infectious. I think everyone here probably felt that in some way.
Yeah.
Where you all can do a little more. And I think that I'd love to learn from you a little bit and how I personally can do more.
No way. It sounds like you're doing a lot. Yeah, thank you, though. I appreciate it.
But no, seriously though, like kudos to you, and I'm glad we could record this, share it with the world. I think the world needs to hear your story and what you've done, and just be influenced, you know. And Nathaniel, thanks for recording that.
Yeah. And Jim, I will send you Vivek's email. Okay.
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Sounds great. Awesome, guys. Well, have a good weekend.
Yeah, thanks. And Nital, any other parting words?
Yeah, no, very, very insightful, and I love the using of the science side and the holistic art side. I feel like that middle space is like where it's so valuable, and I'm really glad you're starting to make those connections and share that. So yeah, and I can only imagine that your students are getting so much from working from you. So I think it's amazing. So it's good. I look forward to staying in touch too.
Thank you. Same here.
Yay! So Vivek, this has been awesome. SAI, I think this is just the first step in our collaboration. As I told you about the paper, I'll send you the details and let me know what you think. 'Cause I think there's space there to get some of these ideas out, as Nital was saying, to some sort of white paper. But this actually will be a full-on publication, which would be kind of awesome to do. Continue to doing what you're doing. I think you're stumbling onto something really awesome, and we're here to assist in any way possible. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.